Alrighty, I think we are live. G'day and welcome to everybody joining in from wherever across the country you may be to I guess it's not new anymore, but the Oak Barrel's virtual live tasting space here on the various platforms that we are streaming on: Facebook, YouTube, Zoom, and the Oak Barrel website. My name's Joe Perry. I am the wine buyer here at the Oak Barrel, a quite fiercely independent Sydney bottle store that's been here since 1956, and hopefully will be here for a lot longer. This is another installment of a range of tastings that we've been running since that awful virus hit us a few months ago, and we were unable to continue with our in-store events that we dearly loved. So we decided that rather than sit around twiddling our thumbs, we would develop a way to get the wine and the whiskey and the gin and the rum and the beers all to your front door, and we would sit down on a given night and taste through together and try as well as we could to replicate the in-store experience. So tonight is yet another very special tasting that doesn't involve just staring at me for an hour and a half trying to pretend that I know what I'm talking about. We're very lucky to have Stu from Alkimi joining us here tonight. G'day, Stu.
Hey, Joe.
And also the lovely Sarah Birch from Saint Wine,
Yes.
the good guys at Saint Wine that we've teamed up with to make this all happen. But if you've maybe been through the shop or had a browse through our website over the last sort of 12 months or so, you've almost definitely heard me talk about the wines of Alkimi, the wines that I love quite a lot. And if you have been to any tastings that have involved me, you've probably heard at one stage my devout love for both the north and south of the Rhone Valley. Hence why it was incredibly exciting to see these come across the tasting bench a little while ago. Not these ones in particular, but the grapes and styles of wines that Stu makes, doing some really incredible stuff out of the Yarra Valley and beyond with varieties that I love as well. So the smile that went on my face when I tasted them, they were absolutely spot on, was pretty amazing, and really grew my faith in these styles of wines coming out of our lovely country in Victoria. I'm not going to try and harp on too much because I definitely want to get stuck in also. But first of all, I want to thank all you guys for tuning in, and thank you to Stu and Sarah. Stu, tell us a little bit about Alkimi and how you got started. I mean, you've probably got one of the more impressive winemaking resumes that I've ever seen, that's for sure.
Cool. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the introduction too. So, yeah, look, I started Alkimi in 2014. I've been in the Yarra Valley since 2012, having studied and worked in Victoria, in South Australia, and also a few vintages in Europe. I decided that I guess I wanted to put my own spin as I believed in wine in general, and also following my passion, which was wines of the Rhone Valley from France. So as I alluded to, I'd worked and also travelled throughout the Rhone, actually on numerous occasions. Have a bit of an affiliation and a love for France as well. So doing wines with a bit of a tilt to the hat of the Rhone Valley was something that I wanted to really do, and also following my passion of the varieties of the Rhone. I really love Grenache. I really love those Northern Rhone Syrahs, and for that matter, being in the Yarra Valley. Also doing something different as well, where at the time, it was all about Pinot and Chard and Chardonnay. And I think doing something different has really been good for me and my brand to be able to just separate myself from that kind of mainstream stigma of what the Yarra Valley is, and really focus on Rhone Valley varieties in the Yarra, and also just to be able to show that there's amazing wines in the Yarra, not just Pinot and Chard, and really trying to put a foothold on that.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, obviously we do see a lot of a lot of Pinot and Chardonnay come out of the Yarra, but there was definitely something there that drove you to these sorts of varieties.
Yeah. I think that probably started for me in probably 2010. I was lucky to work a harvest at Henksche in South Australia, and I think they're just seeing how they kind of treated those Rhone varieties, being, you know, Shiraz for them, the Mourvedre and the Grenache. And there was a lot of Grenache that passed through that place, and I got to see a lot of it and how they handled it, and probably meeting through, you know, good crew introducing me to other good crew, and meeting guys and drinking a lot of good wine with a lot of good people in the Barossa. I really got to see some great Grenache especially. And I think that's where I really kind of got an interest in the wines of the Rhone, and specifically Grenache. I think that more kind of southern Rhone, robust, high tannin, deep, dark style of the Barossa was, at the time, to be honest, what I was really into and really passionate about. So that's probably where my love for Grenache came from, and I still love those really deep, dark, tannic Grenaches. Mourvedre is the same. Obviously, we're tasting the Mourvedre tonight, and that's the same. Grown in the Barossa, obviously, typically known as Mataro in Australia. Mourvedre and Mataro are the same grape variety. Just one is another name, is the French word or synonym for Mourvedre, being Mataro. So I found a real passion in the Barossa, and that really led me to try and find a vintage job in the Rhone Valley in 2010, where I ended up at Châteauneuf-du-Pape at Chateau Moradon. And they're a really amazing family producer with some really old Châteauneuf vineyards in the southern Rhone. So once again, got to sink my teeth into Grenache, Syrah and Mourvedre, and really just kind of really soak up that whole atmosphere and the whole of the southern Rhone. I really loved. Woke up looking at Mont Ventoux every day. Was such a beautiful place to be. And then traveling around. And then ending up, after that, a couple of years later, ending up coming to the Yarra. Actually, in 2011, I had a bottle of a 2008 Yarra Yering Viognier, and it just blew me away. I thought, this is the best white wine in the country. And I thought, right, I was actually working in South Australia at the time, working for Dean Hewitson, who's a fantastic chap. And I thought, this wine is the best, as I said, the best wine the best white wine for me in Australia. And I thought, right, I have to work there. So it was a few phone calls to Bridgie, the winemaker at the time at Yarra Yering, and got to work with him quite closely, which was fantastic. And obviously Yarra Yering, obviously doing the number 1, 2, and 3, and the number 2 being the Rhone variety blend, being mostly Syrah, but also having a bit of Mataro and Viognier, and a few other varieties in it. I got to learn like kind of what cooler climate those varieties could do. So I really got to sink my teeth into that. And once again, ended up in a really amazing wine region with some really cool people, and got introduced to a lot of great people who I still know today. And it's a great place to be, the Yarra. So I really kind of fell in love with it and didn't want to leave in 2012. So I've just kind of kept going with that, and still learning about Pinot and Chard. And I guess since coming to the Yarra, I've really developed a bit of a love for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay since being in the Yarra. And I think learning more about those more finer, delicate styles of wine has really, in the last 8 years, has really been good for my palate. And I really appreciate those really, light to medium bodied styles of both red and white wine, which I can really appreciate now. So I guess it's these wines for me, my Alkimi Rhone range is about putting a spin on these varieties and showing them in a new light and a different light, but always trying to respect their varietal nature, being their true qualities and characteristics of the grape variety, and also never forgetting kind of how I got to this place, which was, traveling and working in France, and then working with these varieties in the past as well, from some quite traditional and historical perspectives. So that's kind of how I've ended up here.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Would you say that there's sort of the way that you've seen these varieties, I guess, handled in Europe and especially in the Rhone Valley, is there a lot of similarities in the winemaking, or like as you said, you know quite happy to see what the fruit wants to tell you and what it wants to do? Is it massively different to do this where you are as your experience has sort of taught you over in Europe?
Yeah, good question. I think part of the draw of Europe for me was to get over there and see something different. I think the way I learned at uni and actually my first job, which was on a significantly large commercial winery, I learned the New World way of winemaking. So lots of stainless steel and lots of, I guess, lots of product additions and lots of kind of winemaking tweaks and things done, I guess, the way, you know, we were taught in a textbook. And I had a really good practical understanding of that from that experience. And that's something I really, I still, you know, take with me to this day. But the draw of Europe, being actually half Italian myself, the draw of Europe was to actually get over there and immerse myself in the culture. So, and also the historical value of how they made wine. So it wasn't just working for those, working for Mourvedre and the other guys that I really appreciated. It was also getting to know their philosophies and how they just thought about things, how they looked at their vineyards, how they drank their wines, what they drank their wines with, and how they kind of looked at wine in general. And it's something that was really easy. I was keen to learn about, and something that was really easy for me to learn because of the way I'd grown up at home. And so, yeah, it was great. And do I think that, you know, we as Australia have similar qualities to Europe? Well, I think we do, but I think Europeans and the way the Europeans make wine, they just do it so effortlessly. Whereas we are really adopting the kind of the old school techniques away from the new world, the new wave of wine, the new world winemaking. We're moving more towards the old world winemaking with kind of understanding of how we're doing it. But I think the Europeans do it so effortlessly, and we've really had to learn that over the last 10 or 15 or maybe even long, 20 years. We've had to unlearn what we've learned. So that's been really interesting, almost growing up in my career through that. And it's something that I can really appreciate and understand. And as I said, I've got a big appreciation for the new world winemaking techniques. I think they're great. And, there's a lot of countries and industries that have been built on the new world of winemaking. And I think there's a lot you can take out of it. But at the same time, I think personally, you get greater depth and complexity out of wine, and you can really make a place amazing by adopting some of these older world techniques. So yeah, I think we're getting there as an Australian industry. And I think there's some amazing producers who are leading the way. We have more than a handful, probably many handfuls of great producers in this country who are doing great things and leading the way with that. And I expect that to grow. And that's something that, I want to be a part of as well.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. It's always interesting when I might have conversations with winemakers that come down here from Europe, and they get always very, very excited about how we're doing things down here without necessarily the winemaking thresholds or laws that they face over there. And it seems like there's a lot of people that make wine here that are very excited about what they're doing over there. So it doesn't feel like it's too far away, that we almost, meet in the middle. And that seems like that's sort of something that you're getting towards in your winemaking as well, right?
Yeah. I think, like I said, it's a lot of techniques and philosophies I've had to almost unlearn. And so I think I like to take risks with my wines. I like to always be learning, always experimenting. And I think actually having my own product that, that I'm paying for myself is a scary thing, because it's my own money. It's like, I don't want to mess this up. But at the same time, because it is mine, I can do whatever I want with it. And so that's the beautiful thing with, I guess, making your own wine as well, is you can do anything and everything you want without having to think about, if this doesn't work, what's going to happen, because you've only got yourself to blame and be responsible to. So yeah, it's good in that way. And I think that's the wave of the young producer and the new producer coming through in the Australian industry is probably also driving that creativity and that research and interest in old techniques, or even completely new techniques that no one has ever done as well. I think is also really interesting. So yeah, I like to think I want to be one of the people who can really influence, but I'm also respecting both the old world and the new world as well, I think.
Yeah, that seems super cool. I mean, this is probably more of a question from my own heart and curiosity, but on doing my research a little bit earlier, you've worked with two of my all-time favorite producers on both sides of the world, Emmerich Knoll in the Wachau in Austria, and also Mac, who's not too far away from you, I guess, right?
Yep.
How was, I mean, Emmerich Knoll especially, what was that, I guess?
Yeah, that was, that was probably the most old school that I've worked in, and obviously visited a lot of cellars over the years. But yeah, Knoll was really cool. So Domain Emmerich Knoll is in Austria, in the Wachau. So that's in the east of Austria, along the Danube River. And they have these beautiful vineyards, and they're all terraced, and they're all south facing all along the southern part of the Danube. And, you know, you'd be picking, or walking through the vineyard, and there's a cruise liner just cruising down the Danube, and you think, oh, I wish I was on that. But, you're slaving away picking grapes. And it was something that was really cool because the vineyards were meticulously maintained. They had such an appreciation and an emphasis on the vineyard. And they had, they had 2 or 3 full-time employees who, outside of vintage, when they weren't helping with the harvest, they were building and restoring dry stone walls for these terrace vineyards. And that, for me, is when I found that out, I just went, okay, I get it. Like, you guys really value this place. You're almost the custodian of this history, and you're actually contributing back, and you're not just sucking the life out of the place. You're actually rebuilding things. You're making things better. You're thinking about the future as well with their vineyards. So I was really appreciative of that. And the vineyards are spectacular, and they've got, as you probably know, there's, different crews for both Grüne Veltliner and Riesling at Knoll and other Wachau producers. And they knew their plots, and they're really small, really, really well. So, one day we were picking 2 or 3 rows from one place, and then we'd jump in the car, and in the afternoon we're picking somewhere else. And then a week later we were back picking the same plot that we picked the week before, only a little bit further down the hill. And like Emmerich Jr. and Emmerich Sr., they just had it all sussed out. And Emmerich Jr., who was at the time when I was there in 2012, was, I don't know, he might have been mid-40s. He knew the place. He'd grown up there, so he knew the place like the back of his hand. And it was great in a way, actually, for you, Joe, is we'd sit down. We always had a big lunch, so it was kind of like entree, main, dessert for lunch. That was kind of the big meal for the day. And so we'd all sit down, and there'd be this big long table in the house, and all the pickers that would come, and all the cellar staff. We'd all sit around the table, and I didn't speak a word of German, so I was just relying on the other kind of interns or stagiaires that were from, say, Germany or Austria, that spoke English, that could kind of translate and show me. But what I found out was Emmerich Sr. would sit at the head of the table, and Emmerich Jr. would sit next to him every day, and they'd sit there and have their soup and have their dessert. And they would talk about what's happening both in the vineyard and in the winery. So what's come in, and this was open in front of everybody. There was no secrets or no in the lab discussions. This was all open dialogue where they were saying, oh, we're picking this, and this is coming in. It might be a bit ripe, it might be a bit underripe. Okay, how do you want to treat that? What do you think we're going to do? Okay, we'll send that there. We'll put that to oak. Yeah, we'll pick that tomorrow. Or maybe we'll hold off picking that. And so it was just this like amazing orchestration of how they work these vineyards. And these guys knew their vineyards and their winery like no other, and obviously making amazing wines. And the cellar was pretty was pretty basic. They would do a bit of skin contact on their Riesling and Gruner, press them off, and then run them to the big foudres or the big barrels. You know, they might be maybe 1,000 litres on average, all neutral oak for the fermentation and maturation. So they get topped up and left, and then they'd sit there on their lees, and then they'd bottle them. And that's the purity of the place. It's all about the emphasis on the vineyard that they put in, and how so much they knew exactly what they were doing in the vineyard. So they actually didn't do a lot of. They still worked. They did a lot of work in the winery, but there wasn't any tinkering. There was no manipulation. It was all very pure. It was all very, yes, that's pressed, that's going there, and that's where it's going to stay until we need to get it ready for bottling and things like that. So they knew intimately what they were doing. And, you know, like what I like to say about really good vineyards, I feel I'm the most happiest with my wines when I can taste the wine in the vineyard before a grape has even been picked. And I feel like they could do that just about every time. They knew exactly what was happening in the vineyard, and they knew probably multiple years ahead of the current time of where the wine was going to be in the future. So that for me is a real art. Comes with skill. Can't read that. You can't learn that in a book. That's something that you get through years of experience, and obviously being immersed in it. They could do that really, really well. So that was really cool. Mac, interestingly, very similar. Obviously, he had ties with Austria. He had a great network in Austria, and it was actually through him I managed to get over there. So thanks to him for that. And so he really, once again, valued the vineyards and valued the work that was put into making great wines. And really, although he was at a bit of the pioneering time in the Yarra, where he was one of the kind of newer, younger faces doing his own thing in the valley. No, this was probably at least 10 years ago, if not closer to 15 years ago when he was starting up. So he really valued the vineyard and put a lot of effort and thought into what was happening in the vineyard. And like what I was saying with what was happening at Canola, is he would sometimes do 2 or 3 picks on a vineyard. And the whole idea was to get the different flavor profiles, so he would end up with the best quality product in the end. So yeah, in the winery, the same. It was very much, once again, a lot of work, but it wasn't necessarily manipulations and tinkering. It was just kind of treating the wine as gently as possible, and then running it to barrel and letting it mature until it was needing to get prepared for bottle. So yeah, I think there's probably a few similarities there. Emmerich and Mac, I think, have a good relationship. So it doesn't surprise me that Mac's philosophy is somewhat similar to that. So yeah, and once again, you know, having learnt off many guys, but 2 amazing producers like that, for me, has really helped me influence my philosophies and where I'm trying to take my wines and what I want to do with wine in general. And as I said, I want to impress people with wine. As we were just saying before we came on air, I want to put a wine in front of people, and I want them to sit back down in their chair and go, "What is that? That is amazing. You can't. How did you do that?" That's kind of what I aspire to do. So that's something that I think both of those guys have done, and I think that's what they aspire to do as well.
Yeah, awesome. It's fascinating for me, and I hope everyone else at home. But I guess the good news is that we've got that opportunity right now. I mean, there's a stack of people sitting at home keenly watching along with 2 bottles of your wine in front of them as well. So maybe we might, and if I'm sure people have already, but we'll probably crack into the Marsan, hey?
Yeah, cool. Joe, do you mind if I do a screen share? And I'll
go for it.
Do some media. So guys, if you're watching, maybe make me big if you can.
If you screen share, you'll go big anyway.
Disabled screen share.
Okay. I fixed this the other day.
It's not a big deal if you can't.
I can. Go now. Give it a go.
Okay. Can you see the map?
Almost, yes.
Yes.
Cool. So this is a map of Victoria. Now, I guess I spent a lot of time talking about the Yarra, and the Yarra is where I spend pretty much all of my time. And most of my wines are actually sourced and grown in the Yarra. But there are times following this passion of the Rhone, there are times where I need to go outside of the Yarra Valley to source my grapes. And the reason for that is the growing conditions are exceptional in other parts of Victoria for these specific varieties. So I think we've spoken a bit about the Yarra, and I might do a little bit more talking about the Yarra in a minute. I probably just want to show you guys a bit of the Victorian wine regions, and this is by and large the bulk of them. There's a couple I'm missing, and I'm sorry, big shout out to those regions that I'm missing, I'm sorry. But obviously everybody's familiar with Melbourne. So the Marsan, which you guys are probably tasting now, is from the Yarra Valley, and the Mourvedre is from Geelong, and we'll go into that. But Geelong, obviously in the west of Port Phillip Bay, and I'll go into a bit of that climatic stuff in a minute. And what I'll also do is I'll just prep up another slide, and I'll show you guys. It's an image of the vineyard of the Marsan. So, sorry, I'm not more organised. So this is a picture of the little Marsan Vineyard, and it's something that I hold pretty close to my heart, where this vineyard's only an acre, and that's pretty small in terms of vineyard size, based in the upper Yarra Valley. The reason why I really like it is it's pretty special in terms of the way it grows the grapes and the conditions that they grow in and how they're managed. And one thing for me, part of me, when I'm sourcing grapes is I want to make sure that I'm sourcing from exceptional sites, sourcing from exceptional growing conditions, and making sure that the result is exceptional. And I guess like talking about, you know, Knoll and Mac and other producers who I've worked for, is the vineyard is very, very important. And without an exceptional vineyard and exceptionally managed vineyard, you'll never grow exceptional grapes and make exceptional wine. You'll always make something beautiful, but the aim is to make something amazing. So I really like working with Ray, and Ray actually lives just down here where his house is. And this is, as I said, a 1 acre block essentially in his backyard. And he planted this in 1994. And he planted it because he liked Marsan. So he got some vines and did it all properly and planted some. And he's been selling over the last 25 plus years. He'd sold to a number of people over the years. But I'm the longest standing purchaser of his grapes, and I work with Ray one-on-one every year. I essentially buy off Ray all of the grapes that he produces off that little 1 acre. So that's something that's really unique. So this wine is exceptionally unique, and we have a good relationship. I mentioned that I'm half Italian, Ray's Italian as well, so we kind of understand each other on maybe a very deep level. So it's something that's really special to me, and one thing I hold really dear to my heart is that Marsan Vineyard. I think it produces, in terms of all my wines, I think this produces the most pure wine that I make. The reason I say that is it's grown, and the vines aren't ever in any sort of stress. They're unirrigated. They're grown in high altitude, about 200 meters above sea level. They get the cooling nature of the upper Yarra Valley. So the conditions are ideal for growing grapes, and Marsan being a warmer climate tolerant grape. Typically when grown in warmer climates, we see less acid, higher color, and probably more forward overt flavors. Whereas we're growing, in terms of this Marsan, we're growing it in the Yarra Valley, and we're growing it at altitude. So that acidity loss is completely negated, and also that fruit profile It's not moving into any kind of forward spectrums. It's all very subtle and delicate flavors. So for me, that's why I really love working with this. And in terms of winemaking, it's hand-picked, it's whole bunch pressed, and I send it to oak. It's fermented naturally, and then pretty much bottled the same year. So about 9 months in oak, and then it's bottled. And in terms of purity and work in the winery, this is probably the least amount of work of all my wines. So that kind of brings home, by good chance, that brings home what we've just been talking about, Joe. So that's why I kind of really appreciate it. Now, talking about the wine itself, now everybody's probably wanting to talk about it.
Stu, can you give me, just right-click my name in the panelist bar and change host again? I broke this off.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's all good. Because I think I know how to do it the other way. I'm like you said, pretty impressed and pretty blown away at this wine in particular. And whilst it's probably not the most interesting thing to say about a vineyard, but what impressed me the most about that vineyard shot there was just how like luscious and green and bright it was, and especially just looking down those rows. I mean, I know when I know driving through, I guess, some more conventionally managed vineyards, you'll always kind of see that really brown kind of dead earth right at the bottom of the rows. And in that vineyard in particular, it just seemed like it had so much life and was just, blooming, as you said.
Are there many producers that you know of that are growing Marsan at that altitude in the Yarra, or are you the high stuff?
I think it's fair to say that the vineyard is the coolest vineyard for Marsan in the valley. There is a vineyard in Yarra Glen that's around the same altitude, but without knowing the vineyard well, generally speaking, Yarra Glen's a lot warmer than where this vineyard's growing. So I'd say it's the coolest vineyard site in the valley for Marsan. That's certainly open for discussion. I can't say that as a official statement, but I would say it'd be one of the for sure. Yeah, it's by Marsan standard, it's cool. Yes.
Yeah, which shows it obviously in the acid structure, which is what I love about all your wines, is that structure that they all have, and that clean acid line in the Marsan that, you know, sometimes it can be really rich and fleshy, and it does have the stone fruit flavor there, but it's got that really lovely acid that just drives through the middle.
Yep. And I think also further to that cooler nature is it doesn't blow the alcohol out. In warmer climates, generally to achieve flavor ripeness, we're pushing the sugar level, therefore the alcohol level out. Whereas in this case, because of the cool ripening nature, the flavor comes on a lot earlier in respect to the sugar level. So this wine always sits between 12 and 12.5%. It's never higher than that. So for me, it's a really good way to make an amazing wine. And we're all, you know, the general trend is we're all chasing lower alcohols. We're all wanting to not blow our alcohols out of the water and lose that flavor and, you know, and make wines overdevelop and lose that freshness. And I think this wine is none of that. It's fresh. It shows that really crisp, clean acid. There's so much floral, white lily and citrus blossom. There's lots of lime and lemon. There's a creamy oak tone too coming through. You get a mealiness as well on the palate and some texture. And also for me, and this might sound a bit funny, but I pick up a bit of a, dare I say, an umami kind of character as well. So umami's like that sixth taste that's fifth taste that's
Sense.
Sorry?
Sense.
Yes.
Sense.
and yeah, so it picks up that taste, which is you know, kind of the savouriness on the mid palate, which I really love about this wine. Goes really well for those people who want to try it. Goes really well with truffle, but for me, for those who can't get a hold of truffle too often, spaghetti vongole I think is a great match for this wine. Seafood.
Yeah, I think as well, just what I'm getting off here, and as you know, Marsan's probably not the most recognizable variety for the everyday punter here in Australia. But it kind of, I mean, it almost goes that direction on the nose to like a richer style of Chardonnay, but then sort of darts back into that aromatic section of something like a Gruner Veltliner, or even like a Riesling like acidity in there, which I'm thinking is for where we are based in the city, in Sydney City, is going to go all, like really, really well with like spicy Thai and Chinese and all that sort of thing. Just because I like really love that florally rush that comes through, but also the broadness on the palate. It's pretty amazing. Have you ever seen that vineyard or Marsan in particular, in certain vintages, ever get in danger of blowing out the alcohol on the vine? Has there ever been under some sort of pressure where it's, you know, sort of gone to a header direction? And
yeah, I've had some terrible examples of Rhone Valley whites over the time. I think when the alcohols blow out, they become, you know, they say that these Rhone whites are more the white wine for red wine drinkers. And I think that rings true when the alcohol does get, say, pushed to 13.5 plus, is you begin to get more of those robust, bigger textures and flavors, and more riper and developed flavors, which, you know, I think that there's a market for that, and there's people who I'm sure really love drinking them. But I think it's sometimes at the compromise of the poise of the wine. And a lot of the times when I see those wines, I either think of them as clumsy or perhaps overdeveloped. Whereas I think there's a nice sweet spot where you can pick these grape varieties and you don't have to let them get richer and higher in alcohol to get the flavor out of them. And this is a really good example where we're not seeing the flavor dialed up to 11. We're seeing the flavor maybe at a 7 or an 8, but it's all really subtle. It's all really delicate. It's all in balance, and everything is there. You've got the marzipan, you've got the pear, you've got the tea leaf notes as well, which is all varietal characteristics of Marsan, but they're just not dialed up to 11, like I said, which means they're not in your face. They're not, you can't pass it by at a million miles an hour and sniff it. You actually have to sit down, enjoy it, have a think about it, but it's all there. The wine is all there. It's crisp and refreshing, and there's plenty of texture on the palate. And as we've alluded to, it'll stand up to food as well, and it will develop. It'll take you on a journey over one night to another, even into the third night, the wine will stand up. And also, for that matter, especially in contrast to, dare I say, clumsy, higher alcohol, broader Rhone whites, is this wine will age. I'm confident this wine will age for a long time. We know that Marsan has a great tendency to age and cellar, and I think this wine will keep for, not that we want to keep it for a long time, but I think this wine will develop with time exceptionally well. It will get a lot richer. You'll start to see some honey tones. All the while, I hope that freshness and that floral tone is maintained, and I'm confident it will. I think there's enough complexity behind the wine to let it stand up to development. And, dare I say, 10, 15 years plus, I think this wine will keep.
Yeah, it's just off the getting a few questions coming through into the Zoom chat here from Scott and also Juliana. And Scott asks, is Marsan a growing varietal in Australia? And then I might piggyback Juliana's question onto that as well, which says, what do you guys think of the Tabuk Marsan, which I guess is maybe one of the more well-known and prestigious Marsans that's made in Australia. But I would almost say, in my experience with it, quite a different style.
Yeah. First question, I'd like to think so. Someone told me probably more than 3 years ago that the coming summer would be the summer of the Rhone white. And I went, great, let's do it. And I don't think it really happened, but I'd like to think that these varieties, the Rhone white varieties in general, are gaining momentum and interest in Australia. I think, once again, as we're learning that we don't need to ripen them out to 13.5%, alcohol to make amazing wines. We're learning about fineness and elegance in these wines. So I'd like to hope there's a bit of a trend slowly coming, and I'm seeing that. I'm seeing a lot more really positive reviews and a lot of articles written about Rhone whites in general out there by all our well-respected and esteemed wine writers and judges. So yeah, I think there's a lot of respect, and as Australians become more educated in what we're drinking, and hey, we've come a long way in 50 or 60 years in terms of what we drink, and I think we'll only get better at drinking great wines and fine wines with time. So I think, yeah, the Rhone whites will become more appreciated for the fineness that they can have, similar to really good ones from Europe. To Bilk Marsanne, love it. Great wine as a go-to. I've got a few in my cellar. I love going to Bilk when I'm down in the Gambia and picking up some aged Marsannes as well. I think it's a fantastic wine. It's amazing value for money. Yes, it's in terms of alcohol, it's not a high alcohol wine, but it does tend to show a little bit richer characters than my Marsanne. But it's a fantastic Marsanne nonetheless. I certainly do not think it's in that broad, clumsy spectrum at all. I think it's really well contained. It's a beautiful drink, and as I said, exceptional value for money.
Yeah, I can really see this being such a food-friendly style of wine. It definitely, yeah, like you said, it doesn't jump out and smack you in the face and let you know about it, but it certainly doesn't get washed away. Really enjoying it.
There's so much complexity to it as well. It keeps drawing you back to the glass, as though you see something else every time you drink it. And just on Marsan being a grow, all Rhone varietals being growing varietals, yeah, I think white Rhone varietals are particularly good for Chardonnay drinkers. So for somebody who likes any style of Chardonnay really, but particularly richer styles, white Rhone varietals are a good sort of step to the left if you want to try something new and broaden your wine drinking, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a good point, Sarah, actually, that you make, because I liken the Rhone whites to Chardonnay, and maybe it's because I've been in the Yarra too long, but I think Chardonnay for me is a textured white wine that should show crispness and floral, but not be a fruit-driven wine. It's more of a savoury, flavoured wine with texture, and I think Marsanne and Rhone whites in general are exactly that as well. So to say that, they're similar, and if it's something that, if you like Chardonnay and you want to have a look at something that's a little bit different, yeah, I totally agree with that call. Absolutely.
Yeah, Scott asks in the Zoom chat as well, says, how does this go at a cellar door or somewhere where big show pony varieties tend to dominate? And I think that'd be an interesting question for actually both of you. Is there ever a point in time where it might be showing varieties like this where people either don't understand it or get intimidated, or just don't want to see it at all, or think they don't need Marsanne, or get swapped out for a Chardonnay or another aromatic variety?
I don't think people get intimidated by it. I think it's definitely not what people expect when they drink a Marsanne. They'd normally expect something that's much richer and riper and more fruit forward. So it's definitely not a normal style. I don't think it would be switched out for Chardonnay. I guess you would have, if you were going to sit them on a wine list together, or have them with a pairing, you would maybe go for a much richer style of Chardonnay and have the Marsanne be the lighter of the white wines. But no, I think it stands up for itself. I don't think it gets overshadowed at all. What do you think, Stu?
I think we've touched on a little bit of this, where it just needs a little bit of time for it to be appreciated. I think if you want something that is quick and easy, and you don't really want to think too much about, this is probably not the wine to be having. There's a wine for every occasion, but for a wine that you want to just give a little bit of thought to, it's not hard, but to give a little bit of thought, mainly yes, because it is a subtle, delicate wine, but also because the variety is not as common. So those kind of tasting descriptors and things aren't necessarily as familiar to us as what it is drinking, say, a Riesling or a Chardonnay or a Sauv Blanc, where we just bang, 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 we get the flavors and we know it. Whereas you're looking at something that's a little bit unfamiliar to most people. So yeah, those flavors take a little bit longer to come. Yeah, so I think there's that, and also being it's, you know, Marsan's been in Australia ever since James Busby arrived in, you know, whatever, you know, centuries ago or whatever it was, you know, 18 something. He brought over Marsan, and the Marsan's had a long history in the Yarra, more than 100 years. So I think, you know, in some way, you know, Marsan has a bit of a history in Australia, but it just has never become that mainstream variety that like a Chardonnay or a Riesling has become. So yeah, it takes a little bit of a discussion, a little bit of a hand sell, a little bit of a, hey, have you tried this? Hey, just slow down and put your nose in this and have a think about it and tell me what you think. And when that happens, you know, it's almost like the light globe goes off in people's heads and they go, ah, yeah, I get it now. So yeah, I think that's something that's it's really nice to do that, actually. But yeah, I think also in terms of my style and the wines that I'm trying to make, and, you know, we spoke about who's influenced me, a couple of guys, and I think this is something that really rings that home, is that finer, delicate style that is a little bit more subtle, that's showing some perhaps closed characters that will age and will stay open for 2 or 3 days and take you on a bit of a journey. I think that's something that I really appreciate in wine. I don't necessarily want my wines to punch you in the face straight away and show you exactly what they are. I want them to entice you and bring you in and kind of get you coming back for more. That's the kind of thing that I want to happen with my wines. And I think this Marsan really does that. So yeah, I think the great Marsans as well out there in Australia really kind of entice people in as well.
Yeah, no, I think this is quite delicious. I know a lot of, like, half the fun of my job sometimes is sending customers to wines like this and then watching them come back a week later and pick up 2 or 3. You know, it's that sort of that light bulb moment, like you said, kind of must click at some point at a restaurant or at the dinner table and you know, strike a good chord. Before we sort of finish up on the Marsan, I guess, if we can keep going, if people want, but David asks, it would be great to hear views on other Rhone white varietals and blends thereof, noting your comments earlier about the love of good Viognier. And I also love good Viognier.
Yeah, Viognier is a funny one where I've had, this is probably a really good example where I've had some really exceptional ones in the Yarra or elsewhere around the world, but I've had some terrible ones too. And I have yet to make a Viognier. I will one day, you can hold me to that. But I think more than any variety, I need an exceptional site for that and exceptionally managed. I think Viognier is probably, of the Rhone whites, it is probably the most unforgiving, I'm going to say. So I really want to make sure if I make one, it's a damn good one. And yeah, commentary about the other Rhone whites. I'd love to be making both Viognier, as I said, finding an exceptional site, and also Roussanne. Actually, I did make a Roussanne in 2015. I went up, as I was talking about, leaving the Yarra every now and then. I made one from the Gambie Lakes in sub-region of the Rhone Valley. And that was great. It was a lovely wine, a little bit bigger and higher in alcohol than what we're looking at with this Marsan. But I actually found the love of Roussanne from working in Côte Rôtie, and Stéphane Augier, who I was working for, he had a bit of a love and a sweet spot for Roussanne, and was making some really delicious Roussannes. And I really got to appreciate the minerality of Roussanne and once again, the delicate nature of that variety. So yeah, I love those other 2 varieties, and really probably because of that experience, Roussanne probably holds the closest place in my heart. And I'd love to actually be blending Marsan and Roussanne. I think there's a couple of reasons why I'm yet to do it. Roussanne, like Marsan, is so hard to come by, specifically in the Yarra, but even elsewhere. And also, all of my wines that I've made thus far have all been single vineyard releases. So once again, we touched on, you know, beautiful sites being meticulously maintained and picked, and had the eyes picked out of them. And those producers all made single vineyard wine. So once again, I guess my philosophy is to show the place that the wine has come from, and once again, showing the purity, as I was talking about with this vineyard and this wine. I think has kind of disencouraged me to consider even blending this Marsanne with a Roussanne or a Viognier from another vineyard in the valley. That once again, that said, I'd love to tinker with it. I'd love to release even a Marsanne, Roussanne, Viognier blend one day. And, you know, as I grow and being an independent small producer, as I grow in profile and grow in production, then, yeah, maybe one day there'll be a chance to, you know, have full control on a property and be able to either graft or plant those varieties and be able to do that. Or something might come up in the meantime as well, and I'll be open to that. So yeah, I have a lot of love for those Rhone whites. I think they're very similar. I actually call them cousins. Viognier being probably the big cousin, being the most forward and out there of the three, in my opinion. But yeah, they all share kind of similar traits, and especially to that, maybe in the cousin perspective, maybe Marsanne and Roussanne are twins in some way, but not identical, but maybe twins. But yeah, they're all very similar varieties, and obviously have their individual traits as well.
Yeah, no, awesome. I would, yeah, I'd be really interested to know in the Zoom chat there and people following along on YouTube and Facebook as well, if this is the first time having either of these varietals and get the thoughts. But I yeah, thoroughly enjoyed the Marsan. Yeah, delicious.
I enjoyed talking about it.
Should we get stuck into the Mourvedre?
Yeah, let's.
Mourvedre.
So back in 17 now, right, Stu?
Yes. So that was 2018, that Marsan, and yeah, we're back to 2017. Bit of a fun one, actually, as you guys are probably all having a sniff and having a look at it. Mourvedre, for me, is typically higher in alcohol, richer and fuller, and showing probably flavours more typical with a riper spectrum of fruit. So maybe your secondary darker spectrum like plums, figs, even maybe some more stewed strawberry tones. All the while showing, you know, what I like to see is varietal characters like spice and leather and earth, and typically having bigger tannins and higher alcohol. And that was a real influence for me when I made this wine. As we said right at the start, having had a number of exceptional Mataros or Mourvedres from, I guess, around the world, but maybe the Barossa specifically, drinking so many great wines over there, I knew that I would have been creating a standalone variety or a single vineyard standalone variety wine, being the Mourvedre. So I wanted to play to the strengths of the variety, but I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't coming up short in any other element. And I guess for me, wine is all about balance. So what I wanted to do was encourage more fruit and less alcohol and less tannin, all the while acknowledging that Mourvedre typically has a bit of a donut on the mid palate. I wanted to build up that mid palate as well, similarly handling it to a Pinot Noir. So yeah, that was part of that, was picking it in a bit more of a fresher spectrum. So seeing primary fruit and crunchy acidity, and perhaps a little bit of lightness in sugar or lightness in body with this wine, rather than pushing it right out to a fully ripened, full-bodied red. I wanted something that was probably light to medium bodied, something in my portfolio of wines that was more of a funner red. So something that you could chill, something that you could put on the pour at a restaurant, something that you could have, you know, if people came around and you just whipped it out and, you know, let's sit on the balcony and have a glass of red, and, you know, give it some thought, obviously, but not have it knock your head off and, you know, needing a meal or needing a steak to cut through it and it being a meal in itself. So I was going for that freshness and vitality. And I think all the while showing those, as I alluded to, showing that spice and showing that cured meat profile that I think Mourvedre does so well, showing that in this wine. I'll quickly touch on the vineyard if I can, Joe.
You should be able to do it now. I think I fixed it.
Okay, so just let me go to, and then I'll do a share screen. So as we touched on, this vineyard is actually from Geelong. And what I want to do is I'm just going to show you guys. You can see that screen?
Yeah.
So this is thanks to Wine Australia, this is the GI or geographical indicator of Geelong, the Geelong wine region. Melbourne's up here. Yarra Valley's kind of, you can just see Yarra over here. There's Lilydale. Hello, Lilydale. So, yeah, we're on the western side of Port Phillip Bay. And Geelong's an interesting one where it actually has, like the Yarra, has a lot of different aspects to it. The aspect that we're looking at is actually up here. So this is a spot where, contrary to along the coast and the Bellarine Peninsula, this is a spot that has a bit of a Mediterranean-esque environment, where it's quite warm and dry in the summer, has really low summer rainfall. The nights typically are quite warm during the growing and ripening period. And I think all the while, because it's it does get some cooling effect off the bay, but it doesn't get a massive cooling effect off the bay as you would so much in the Bellarine Peninsula or around the coast. So, yeah, typically it's warmer and drier essentially up there. And I guess soil profile wise is really interesting. This vineyard, there's lots of red iron or alluvial soils, but also the really interesting part is there's speckles of limestone scattered throughout, and limestone is really exceptional at holding its acid, or holding the acid of the grapes as well. So it's a great vineyard for growing. The vines are actually dry growing, and they're western facing as well. Pretty exceptional. It's about the only photo I could find on my phone, unfortunately, but you can see those red soils. Yeah, quite alluvial, and typically Mourvedre, has a low growing habit, or is not as vigorous as other varieties. So it's not growing its head off, but typically the bunches can be quite big. So I'll just go back, Joe, to you.
Oh yeah, it's all good. This should be me fine.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying that earthy, that forest floor, that mushroom, that dark stewed fruit, stewed berry that's coming in there. It's really enticing. But I think it's interesting seeing Mataro or Mourvedre straight here in the shop and selling to people. And I mean, I guess on a wider note, the most exposure we have to it is in GSM blends and those Southern Rhone type blends. And I mean, for me, in those blends, that Mataro note is always I guess, a bit of a backbone, or a sort of a muscular influence that kind of brings in a lot of that smoke. And as you were alluding to earlier, the bigger, more higher ABV extracted styles. We do see a bit of that made straight here in Australia as well, but this is, completely down the other end of approachable, delicious, sort of very Moorish.
Cool. It's I think I alluded to it. It's something even in a warmer climate like the beautiful Sydney weather that you've been having, Sarah. It's the kind of wine you can throw in the fridge, not for too long, but maybe for half an hour to just knock a bit of that temperature out. Serve it at around 8 to 10 degrees. The reason why you can kind of put this in the fridge, if you so desire, is because the alcohol's not too high and the tannins aren't very aggressive, and there's plenty of juicy fruit in the wine. It actually lends itself to being put in the fridge. Typically, if it had lots of tannin and higher alcohol, a wine that's put in the fridge, those characters or those elements would actually stick out and actually become out of balance or get in your face too much. So because those those elements in the wine aren't too aggressive, it lends itself to being put in the fridge. And because there's such beautiful fruit, like you said, Joe, like it's made for it. It's a great, got complexity, but it's a great easy drinking wine as well.
I think that's true of all your wines, though. They will pair perfectly with so many different foods, but they don't need food. You can just enjoy them by themselves and sit on a glass, sit on a bottle and keep going back to it and seeing something different every time. But yeah, especially with the Mourvedre, it doesn't have the huge tannin and alcohol that it sometimes can, so it doesn't need food to balance it out. You can just enjoy it by itself.
It was fun to make as well. So as I alluded to, picked it reasonably early by Mourvedre standards, and then there's a bit of whole bunch in this. So it was hand-picked, and the whole bunches were put into a vat and sealed up for probably about 2 weeks. And that's to really give that brightness and juiciness and that soft tannin profile, which we see. And also there was a component in this wine that was just typically destemmed. So I removed the stalks as the grapes were. I removed the stalks from the grapes and then fermented those essentially grapes in contact with the skins for probably around the same amount of time. And that helped extract some of that savouriness, a little bit of tannin, all the while making sure that I didn't over-extract it at all in any way. And then once again, because I wanted a fresh, easy wine, I bottled this quite early. So this was bottled right at the start of spring in 2017.
Yeah, we're just getting everybody's dinner reports in the Zoom chat here, which I'm sure were far more impressive than what I had for dinner. But Juliana says that it is fantastic, having it with some roast pork belly and radicchio salad.
Yum.
Yeah.
And then we've also got Clara having some Vic's meat, steak, mash, and salad. And I mean, Sarah might know what Vic's meat is, Stu, you might not, but it's some pretty outstanding meat that we get here in Sydney. And Dave is having it with some Middle Eastern salads and dips. So I think just goes to show that it's so it matches up well with a plethora of foods there.
Yeah, very versatile.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for enjoying the wine with your dinner. I appreciate it. And hello to everyone who's been asking questions too. Thank you.
So I guess you touched on sort of blending with the whites, Rhone whites on the last wine. Is there a GSM or something on that note that you'd be looking at doing somewhere down the track?
Yeah, look, once again, trying to follow the single vineyard identity card. But there is possibly something in the works. But long term, as I said, with the blending of the three white Rhones, I'd love to do it and probably show the individual characteristics coming together, almost like yin and yang, the imperfections of one cancelling out by the positive qualities in the other. I'd really love to do that and have a lot of fun with that. I think there's so many options, and what goes first in terms of percentage in the blend and how the wine looks, whether you want a more fruit-driven wine, whether you want a more savoury wine, more food-friendly, more easy to drink. There's so many options with blending. I think it's awesome. And one thing I've learned as a winemaker over the years is even 1% goes a long way to changing the wine. And realistically, when you're looking at wines on the bench and showing them, sometimes 1% is a stylistic choice more than anything. So yeah, I'd really love to get drilled into blending of the three big ones, being Syrah, Mourvedre, and Grenache, and even for that matter, all the others, the Cinsaults and the Carmenere. The Cinsaults and all the other Rhone red varieties that are grown. So yeah, it's something that I'd love to do, and yeah, one day I'd like to be able to do that and be really proud of what I've produced as well.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's some pretty exciting stuff on the way that we get to look forward to. I forgot to include Scott's dinner. on this one as well. He's just going to have another bottle of the Marsan, I think he says. And then he also says, are there any varietals you'd like to work with in Victoria that you haven't found yet or found the right site for yet?
Good question. I'd like to work with some Cinsault. I think playing around with that as a standalone variety is something that is interesting to me. It's something that I've kind of seen a few wines of that can be in the winery, can be played around with either with extended maceration or whole bunch fermentation and probably everything else in between. So I see that, as challenging as that sounds, I see that as a bit of fun to be able to really drill down and learn about that. So yes, I'd love to play around with all Rhone varieties and even for that matter do, you know, a crazy Chardonnay blend, which would be a blend of many reds and many whites. And maybe one day that will happen. So yeah, for me, that's not scary. That's fun. That's something that I see as really going to the nth degree to really show your passion and really drill down and essentially do something really special that at this stage, not a lot of people have done in Australia that I can think of. So yeah, I think that'd be something that'd be really fun and interesting and pioneering to also being so passionate about the Yarra Valley. If the grapes were grown in the Yarra, to really show that hopefully something amazing in terms of warmer climate, Mediterranean grapes can be grown in what is a cool or coolish wine region in Australia. I'd really love to pioneer that. And I think the biggest testament to that is Bailey Carretas planting, I believe, 6 Portuguese varieties, probably maybe close to 20 years ago in the Yarra Valley on his site at Yarra Yering. And as far as I know, those grapes ripen every year to maturity, and the wines, the dry red number 3 that comes off that is exceptional every year as well. So, you know, and if you could say those red varieties, or most of those red varieties, have a similar ripening tendency or ripening window as a lot of these Rhone reds. So I don't see why with the perfect site or a good site and well-maintained vines and well-managed vines that, you know, we can't make an exceptional Rhone red blend, or that matter, a Rhone white blend in the Yarra Valley in the future.
That's pretty exciting. And then we've also got a few follow-up questions. I'm glad to see there's a lot of other Rhone Valley nuts in the chat here. Dave would like to hear about your experience at Mourvedre, as well as any recommendations or views on other straight Mourvedre Mataro, I'm assuming here in Australia. And also, Julian would love some GSM recommendations.
Okay. Very, very good question. I think, well, let's go with Mourvedre first. A great experience for me. I believe they had a significant amount of holding of privately owned Chardonnay vineyards, and they were one of, if not the biggest privately owned Chardonnay vineyards in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So they have a long history of producing and great wines. And really interestingly, why the reason why the wines appealed to me is they always were the delicate wines of Châteauneuf, where a lot of these Grenaches out of Châteauneuf-du-Pape or blends typically were high alcohol, tannic, drying, really savoury, dark, really kind of red rose, almost pushing that Taran rose kind of character. Whereas Mourvedre's philosophy and their wines always have been still very age-worthy, but always have been very soft and generous and plush, showing what were, you know, ripe varietal characters, but they weren't over-extracted and they weren't really tannic and deep. They were really quite fine and delicate. So that was really good to get that experience. And really, like, for me, the winemaking was as much to extract as much out of the grapes as they could. So that really came back to, once again, the vineyard and how they were managed and picked, and things were left to ripen, but they weren't left to the end, to windfall, to the end of harvest, or they weren't ripened right to the end. The vines were still green and healthy when they were being picked, which showed that they still had plenty of life in them to actually give more had the domain wanted to give more to the grapes and to ripen further out the grapes. So it was a great experience to see kind of the Chateauneuf style that was probably a bit atypical of what we think about. But as you know, as cycles and as fashion happens, you know, those wines are becoming more and more, as we've discussed, more and more in trend. So their style is certainly well received. They're a beautiful family. They're off memory, they were two families which were both, I think they were brothers, and they both equally managed the domain, and they were a lovely family to work for and experience, and always up for a chat, and everybody was all around every day, and it was a pretty happy working environment. Lots of work, lots of grapes. Obviously they produce exceptional Côtes de Rhone and other wines like a Lirac, which is another region near Chateauneuf across the Rhone. So yeah, there was lots of work and lots of things to do, but yeah, I really sunk my teeth into the Grenache Shiraz and the Mourvedre, and a bit of Viognier as well, and Roussanne. So yeah, that was an exceptional time. The cellar had just been upgraded as well, so it was good to see that. They were really pushing into that stainless steel new world winemaking that I was alluding to before. So you know, that was familiar to me on an Australian perspective. So it was good to see on another country's perspective. In terms of wines, that's a really good question. I think specifically in the Yarra, in terms of Grenaches and Grenache blends, you've got Stuart, which is Tom Carson's own wine label that he produces with his wife Nadej, and that Grenache is every year for me an amazing wine. I try and get my hands on it every year. It's a little bit difficult to get to every year, but they make so little of it. But that for me is one of the hallmarks of Australian, the Yarra Valley Grenache. And you've also got Pimpernel in the valley, and they do GSM blend. They also put a little bit of aromatic muscat in their GSM, which kind of makes the wine pop a bit. I think maybe learning a little bit from Bailey Caritas over the years as well has influenced them there. And in terms of straight varieties of Grenache, Shiraz, and Mourvedre, I think about something that I've been drinking a few of is a winery and small producer similar to myself in the Barossa Valley called Rock of Wisdom, and they make some great wines, both from two perspectives, one of which is the more serious, I guess more typical, yet still showing some restraint, Barossa Valley, both single varieties of Shiraz, Grenache, and Mourvedre, or as they call it, Mataro. And they're, as I said, they're bigger wines, but they're also showing a lot of restraint and delicate tones. And they're really exceptional drinking with a couple of years on them. I've found I've got a few tucked away in my cellar, which I enjoy every now and then. And I'd also like to say that their entry-level range called Superfly is great value for money. And they take those varieties, whether they're in a blend or a standalone variety, and they pick them a little bit earlier. They a bit more playful and a little bit more fun, and probably like what we've been talking about, there's more of an emphasis on fruit and drinkability with those wines, and less of a serious nature than their premium range, the Rock of Wisdom range. So there's some really exceptional wines, and kind of that nouveau and fresh and young influence of the Barossa Valley that we're actually seeing a lot with. You think about Steve Crawford and Frederick Stevenson and Dan Graham at Sigrid, and those guys are really pushing some really interesting techniques and, going against what has been in the Barossa tradition for so long. And that's what the tradition was what I was really familiar with back in 2010 and 2011. So, to see those guys that I've known from there and then doing exceptionally well and putting their own spin on things is a real testament. And as I've alluded to, both Steve and Dan's wines are exceptional wines, and they make some great wines. So yeah, Frederick Stevenson and Sigrid are also two producers, which are ones to hunt out along with Rock of Wisdom from the Barossa.
Yeah, we're lucky enough to carry both Dan and Steve's wines here in the store, and yeah, can't get enough of them. And I'll probably just throw Michael Hall's Straight Roussanne in there as well.
Yep.
As one of the best I've had. And also the Viognier from Yeringberg. Been drinking a lot of that as well.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I mean, that I reckon that. Well, I think we've answered all the questions anyway. We've certainly enjoyed some pretty special bottles of wine. Juliana just says quickly, what do you think of the Clonakilla Viognier, little Canberra producer?
They make two. I like the entry level one because it's easy drinking and really fresh. But that I actually had it, I think last week or the week before that. Premium Clonakilla Viognier is up there in that top tier of Viogniers in the country. So you think Yarra Yering, you think Yeringberg, you think about Clonakilla, and you also think about Castagna up in Beechworth as having, there's probably a couple of others that I'm forgetting, and shout out to those guys. But there's definitely a top tier of Viognier producers in the country, and that Clonakilla is certainly up there as well. Really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's pretty special, and I mean, just coming off the Canberra producer conversation, have you seen any smoke taint in 2020? Scott asks in the Yarra or any of your sites for that matter.
Yeah, good question. Yarra was spared in a nutshell. We were pretty scared and worried, and we had a few group seminars. The best one was Ian Porter from I believe La Trobe Uni came out, and he's probably the guru in Australia, and probably considering our smoke research in comparison to the rest of the world is number one. He's probably the number one guru in the world of understanding smoke, and he came out and put all our minds at ease. This was in January, and essentially said we're far enough away from the smoke source to be okay. We all did our own tests as advised, and everybody came back with a completely zero negative result. So we were spared this year. It's the Yarra over the years hasn't. And, unfortunately, that's part of, I guess, farming and agriculture in Australia. And grapes are highly susceptible to smoke taint and smoke source. If it's close by, we're in dire straits. So, it's a little bit scary thinking about it. Luckily, we got away with it this year, but touch wood, that continues. But, every year poses its challenges. So, I dread to think or talk about it.
Yeah, I think 2020 is definitely going to be, it's going to have a little asterisk next to it in years to come, I think, in the Australian wine scene, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
We have a couple more questions from Dave, I think, probably before we wrap things up there. But he asks, how do you see the impact of climate change on Victorian wine? And also any recommendations for wines from the Rhone would be greatly welcomed.
Yeah, okay. Climate change on Vic wine. We're harvesting earlier and earlier every year. So it's, dare I say, it might upset some people, but it's real. I believe it. I acknowledge it. I want to tackle it head on. I want to do my bit to try and reduce it and minimize its impact as much as I can. And hopefully, we can pass this world on to the next generation and the generation after that, and so on and so on, in a good condition. So these vineyards and these wines can still live, and we can still inhabit the earth. So, look, it's warming. The Yarra's probably warmed in terms of harvest date about 30 days more advanced than what it was 30 years ago. So where we were probably 30 years ago, back when I was probably barely in primary school, the Yarra was picking Pinot Noir, say, in March, pushing late March, April, and now we're picking it in the middle of February And rather than feathering it into especially those warmer sites where those old vineyards are, rather than feathering it into a beautiful zone where we've got a few days to pick the perfect elegant Pinot Noir that's, we're able to really drill down on it. We're picking a lot of those warmer sites. We're kind of drawing an arrow or throwing a dart at a dartboard and getting it off before it gets cooked. High alcohols and neutral dry red flavors. So, yeah, that's unfortunately that's the reality of what's happening in the Yarra, and there's plenty of historical evidence to back up what I've just said. So, yeah, it's unfortunate. We every now and then we have great years, but every now and then we have terrible years where climate change really affects us as well. And I think those terrible years will become more and more often, and there'll be a lot more pressure on wineries and grape growers to somehow manage that. And there's techniques, but it's certainly real, and it's something that we all think about and talk about. Rhone recommendations. Well, we're talking about Mourvedre in Châteauneuf. I send a big shout out to Stéphane Augier in Côte-Rôtie. He's a great guy and producing, probably in line with those comments. He took over a small vineyard holding by his father, and typically his father, this is in Côte-Rôtie, his father was selling to the big boys in Côte-Rôtie, and then Stéphane took over management of his father's estate and domain when he was quite young. He was probably barely out of his teens, and he had taken over and changed the winemaking a little bit and kept all the grapes for himself, or for the domain, I should say. And he ended up getting 100 Parker points on his first vintage. So that doesn't come around often at all. So ever since then, he's been on the map, and he's always been pioneering and pushing forward and forming great relationships with his growers and, making great wines. So, yeah, if you can get your hands on any of those Côte-Rôties, definitely, or any of his other wines for that matter, definitely go out and get some Augier, Stéphane Augier. You put me on the spot all the way from Jamais to Chateau Lanaut to, whoever else that, he's on. There's plenty of producers out there in the Rhone, which I can think of, and ones that I can't think of either, to be honest. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of great wine being made both north and south of the Rhone, I think, at the moment. But Augier would totally be one of my top picks as well, for sure. I mean, I think we aimed for an hour and went for an hour and 21. But I thoroughly impressed with these wines, as I always am of yours, Stu. So just want to give you and Sarah as well, and the guys at St. Wine, a massive thank you to jumping on board with us in this new little virtual thing that we're doing. And I really enjoyed that. And also a huge thanks to everybody that tuned in on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, and our website as well, who was pretty much here the whole time, which was pretty amazing as well. So I think we're going to probably pull stumps on at least Facebook and YouTube for now. But otherwise, guys, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Stu. That was great.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, guys.